Violence, abuse, and exploitation are tragic aspects of childhood for many children in Africa. African children and young people suffer from widespread physical, psychological, emotional, and sexual abuse, armed conflict, violent extremism, and the recent COVID-19 pandemic fostered an environment for the violence against children to flourish. Surveys show that the vast majority of children experience violent discipline. Nearly 1 in 3 teenage girls have been beaten or hit since the age of 15, and 1 in 10 raped or sexually abused.
Violence against children is one of the most common forms of abuses and exploitation that children in Africa face. In fact, data shows us that 8 out of 10 children have faced one form of violence or witnessed it in the course of their childhood before they are 18.
Despite better laws and policies to tackle violence against children, Africa still has some of the highest rates of violence towards children. The African Child Policy Forum research shows that in some African regions, more than 80% of children aged 1 to 14 experience violent discipline, and 4 in 10 girls suffer sexual violence. Child marriage, which is a serious violation of children's rights, affects 4 in 10 girls aged 20 to 24 who are married before their 18th birthday.
Child marriage in some countries is as high as 50%, 80%. Female genital mutilation in some countries is as high as 100%. There's child trafficking, there's child labor. So there are various forms of child violence against children that children across the continent are facing. And so the African Child Policy Forum is highlighting that this is an emergency. It's an emergency that is affecting our children now, and it's going to affect the whole of the African continent in the future if we do not act quickly and immediately.
Indeed, there's still a lot of cases of violence against children on the continent, specifically in relation to children with albinism, because of superstitions and beliefs that the body parts of persons with albinism can give good luck. Persons with albinism, and including children with albinism, have been abducted, killed. They've had body parts taken off them to be used for ritual purposes.
What is consistent is the suffering of children, whether it is politically driven violence, or climate-driven violence, or cultural-driven violence, sometimes religious-driven violence, because these forms of violence that happen in the name of religion, regardless of what is driving the violence, the common denominator is that children are suffering. And in this conference, we're also highlighting the hidden forms of violence. There's some violence that nobody speaks about. There's violence against children with disabilities, who maybe even at home they are chained, they are tied in chains, they're not allowed out to play, they're not allowed to integrate with other children. So we're talking about the hidden forms of violence, the violence against children with intellectual disabilities, who in many of our countries are a source of shame even for their own parents and communities, because the child has been born with a mental challenge. We're talking about violence that is related to witchcraft accusations. Witchcraft and the voodoo and the taboos that happen in our communities. Children who are born with diseases that nobody understands, for instance, epilepsy. In certain communities, it is stigma. Those children face violence. Children living with albinism, they face ritual-related attacks and killings. Their bodies are chopped off, parts of their bodies, they are killed. So we are talking about the hidden forms of violence also, which nobody talks about, which are not documented. There is no data, but we know they happen. So it's a moment to understand the magnitude of the common forms of violence, but also the existence of the very hidden forms of violence, and bring them out so that the governments can develop the right laws and the right policies to protect these children whose violence has been really hidden and is more shameful.
Faced with these disturbing findings, and with seemingly little prospect of improvement, the African Partnership to End Violence Against Children hosted a Pan-African Learning Symposium on violence prevention aimed at renewing action to prevent violence against children. The symposium brought together government representatives from over 30 African pathfinding and aspiring countries, with child rights actors and researchers from across the continent, and leading voices on child rights from across the globe.
So we have convened this symposium on violence prevention, And we've been very lucky. We have 34 African governments represented here, right from minister level, permanent secretary level, state minister level, and director of children. And we also have partners from academic and from civil society, from different NGOs, African NGOs and country NGOs. And what we are hoping that the 3 days of conversations, discussions, learning and sharing that we have had here in this, at this venue is that countries will renew their commitment to end violence against children, that there's a deeper personal and national commitment from director level up to ministerial level to make sure that we can prevent violence against children. And the reason for this is because there has been a lot of learning and sharing. We are also hoping that countries will take back what they have learned, what they have shared. That, for instance, if the minister from Sierra Leone has heard of what is happening in Malawi, has heard what is happening in Lesotho, what is happening in Sudan, they will take what is good and borrow it and change it, just adapt it to suit their context and their countries. So this is a moment and opportunity for us to share knowledge, share experiences, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can borrow from your brother, from your sister, from another country, take it to your country and use the same things to end violence against children, to prevent this violence from happening.
Senior government officials and civil society leaders from over 30 African countries convened the symposium on Wednesday, May 11th, in an effort to tackle rising levels of violence against children.
This is a really good platform. It's brought together over 30 countries. And from listening to every country's experience, the unifying factor is indeed there is violence against kids. And but also what, sort of as a big highlight is that work is being done. It's slow for us to see the progress that we want to see because we're hungry for success, but progress is being done. It's a complex issue, but we're seeing commitment, we're seeing accountability, we're seeing service delivery, we're seeing children's participation.
There are 12 countries in Africa designated as pathfinding countries by the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, a United Nations initiative launched in July 2016. These are Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Guinea, Kenya, Namibia, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Pathfinding and aspiring countries from across the continent joined a 3-day meeting to renew commitment, encourage each other to step up and explore homegrown African solutions to prevent violence against children. These countries have committed to raising awareness, mobilizing leadership, galvanizing action, and establishing national standards to end the scourge of violence against children.
We are trying to see what do we borrow that is good from our traditions that we can use to apply as solutions, but also saying that there's also African culture that is harmful, and how do we leave what is harmful and pick what is good and grow what is good and share what is good and scale it up to other regions. It's been a very good conversation because we have problems, but even we as Africans, we have solutions. We know them. Let's share them. Let's scale them up, and let's encourage each other to find domestic, homegrown African culture to really sort out our problems.
The Pan-African Symposium to End Violence Towards Children deliberated on what is expected from African governments in order to tackle social and cultural attitudes, gender discrimination, and poverty, which drive violence against children. 3 things are emerging in terms of what African governments need to do, and I'll list them. The first and most important is to implement the laws and policies. We have so much that is written. Our countries have signed so many international laws. Our countries have rich constitutions, every single country,
has a constitution that prohibits abuse of children, exploitation of children, violence against any member of the society. So enforce these laws. It's good to have new laws, but if we can just implement and enforce the existing laws and policies, then 80% of the job will be done. So that's the first one, enforcing laws effectively. The second one is to provide the resources, financial resources. Prevention needs money, but also so we are reminding governments that prevention needs money, but response needs even more money. It's cheaper to prevent. So governments to allocate resources at national level for violence prevention. And part of that resource needs to be to build the human resource in government, train social workers, train teachers, train police officers, prosecutors, judges and magistrates on how they can use their own desks in the system, in the court system, in the school system to prevent violence. And the third one, and this one only government can do, nobody else can do, is coordination. Because everybody has a role to play in violence prevention. We've talked about traditional leaders, teachers, police officers, the people who make the laws, the parliaments. All these people have to be brought together so that they're doing the same thing and saying the same thing. That is 100% the responsibility of government, to coordinate all the different players from the village level to the national level so that everybody is working in the same direction and saying the same thing and doing the same thing in a way that complements each other and is well coordinated. And the collaboration then will make us see results quickly. And they say this, and this is an African proverb, I don't know from which country, that if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So this is what you're saying, let us go together, let us work together, because if we want to go far in preventing violence against our children, for this generation, for the next generation, we must work together. So government needs to really be the one that brings us together, coordinates us. And so we are so excited that when we invited governments for this meeting, with a lot of support even from the Ethiopian Ministry of Women and Children, that we were actually able to get 34 governments saying that yes, we will put our hands up, we will stop everything we are doing, we will come to Addis Ababa and we will recommit to ending violence against children. So we are excited. It's a good moment. It's a moment when we can really decide to move faster and further and go together to end violence against our children.
For us in Sierra Leone, which has been unprecedented, is the involvement and participation and commitment of our own president. It's not just sort of me as a minister, but our president sits in a committee every month with everybody coming on the to the table as a multi-sectoral approach, and everyone come in with what you're doing and what results you're making, and that level of accountability, that level of commitment is making a difference. One thing I have learned being here is the mainstreaming of activities that enable prevention. It's a multi-sectoral approach that will bring the end to violence against children. So it's important for every country to articulate and understand what that multi-sectoral approach means, what ministries each ministry can contribute, and how that can be mainstreamed within their activities, to bring an end. Education is prevention. Cash transfer is prevention. Women's economic empowerment is prevention. But we put it aside as a standalone rather than looking at it as prevention mechanisms and approaches for ending violence against children. And that is something that's key.
There's a role for traditional leaders who are still very prominent in many societies in our African context, and for them to be sensitized on how they can use their traditional power and authority positively in a way that prevents violence. The same thing with the religious leaders, even traditional religion and modern religions. How do we work and create sensitization and understanding among the religious traditional leaders in communities which worship in the traditional way to make sure that they can use that authority they have, that power they have to influence people to use it positively.
Even 30 years after the African Charter was adopted, many African governments have failed to adequately protect their children. Though some progress has been made in violence prevention, The gains made in the recent years are in danger of being reversed because complex social and political problems have been made worse by economic crisis and reduced investment in social and child protection programs.
Many countries have the laws and the policies, but in the community, in the village, in the regions and in the districts, violence is still continuing. And so one of the things that has come out very strongly is that there's a very important, that the primary responsibility is for the governments, yes. But the secondary responsibility is for communities, families, aunties, uncles, our traditional African structures and setups. They have a huge role to play. And that is where the African solutions lie. Because the African solutions don't lie in the law. The African solutions lie with my grandmother, with your grandmother, who knows what African tradition is and how African tradition has been used to protect children. For instance, in the sense of ending corporal punishment, there are African solutions to that children who transgress laws and children who have problems with discipline, they do not have to be whipped and caned. In the traditional systems, you had a system of aunties and uncles, of age mates and age sets, and they mentored the child, they mentored the boy or the girl. They provided traditional sources of wisdom, traditional proverbs that were used to teach children and shape their behavior. It was not corporal punishment in the African context. So we are saying, how can we go back and draw on these indigenous knowledge systems and behaviors that were used by our great-grandmothers and bring them back and use them well?
And I think one of the other key findings that came out was utilizing our own gatekeepers. We have our gatekeepers that people listen to, our traditional leaders, our religious leaders, our elders that people listen to, and getting them to start speaking up. And also another thing that is also key is the voice of kids, getting them to participate, getting them to be involved. I heard, I think it's, I don't know if it's Kenya, but another country that really are looking at child parliaments, so the involvement of the children. And so that is also something that we will look at in Sierra Leone to see how the voice of children, is amplified, so they're involved in decision making in different sort of ministries. So those are homegrown solutions, and those are solutions that we can also share across the continent that can make a difference. So one of the success stories that came forward was using the same spirituality in terms of the taboos to address those issues. Somebody gave an example, I think in Nigeria, where the traditional leaders place a curse on every single person that will abuse, children. And that created a change, apparently, because people are so scared, and so that, prevented them from doing any sort of negative, action towards kids. So that's that, and Western, experts may poo-poo that, but the evidence shows that it worked.
It takes a long time to change minds and attitudes, but it can be done, and we've seen that, to raise awareness. And I think we need to also know, unfortunately, sometimes the family that's supposed to protect the child is also the perpetrator, the one that's causing violence against the child. So in society, we have a tendency of minding our own business. We just feel, well, that's his mum, that's the dad, I'm not involved, I shouldn't be involved. But it is important for society to know actually that, violence against children, preventing violence against children, it's all our responsibility. We cannot see a mother or a father violently, terribly beating a child and just turn our heads and think, it's the mum, I have nothing to say. We need to also speak up. We also need to play a role in educating other people, in also preventing and just saying to somebody that actually this can't be done. It sounds bad, but sometimes we also have to report them to the police. You're thinking about the parent, but you also have to think about the child and think that the child also needs to be protected. And if the mother is not protecting, society needs to protect. And then also, just like I said, also raising awareness so that society at large understands things that may see, like albinism, for example. Sometimes society perpetuates that. They make a mother feel that there's something wrong with her child because her child is different, and that may contribute to the mother not loving their child. So the more that society understands that this is a scientific, normal thing, then the less they are stigmatized towards a person with albinism, the less they are stigmatized towards a child. If a child behaves in a manner that you don't understand, you don't immediately assume that the child is demon-possessed or that the child is a witch. We need to ensure that society is also aware of these issues, of what's going on. So raising awareness is very important.
We are really also just pleased that, how we are able to work with the African Union, because it's very important. In this meeting, we've had representatives from the African Union, from the African Committee on the Rights and Welfare of Children, and from the United Nations. We've had special mandate holders from the United Nations, 2 who have sat with us here. UNICEF, they have been here the whole meeting. So it's very important, even as we are speaking as Africans, to make sure that we link what we are doing to the African Union, which really is the core of who we are as Africans, that brings us together, but to make sure we link it with what is happening on the international platform, with the UN mechanisms, with the UN processes. So this has also been an opportunity, and we've been able to do that, so that also we can tell the rest of the world that Africa is taking initiative to end its own problems. And we as Africans recognize our problems, we know our challenges, and we are committed to ending them. So that we are not only saying help us, we are saying we can help ourselves as Africans.
The 3-day symposium, shining the spotlight on the violence and abuse against children in many African countries, brings hope for African efforts that are renewed and strengthened in the fight against this critical issue that stems in a number of forms.